My name is Kathy Carter. I'm a Microsoft certified trainer. I'm also a Microsoft Office Master Instructor. For the last 11 years, I've taught thousands of employees on Microsoft Office business applications. For the next 5 minutes, we're going to learn how to create a pivot table. So, our takeaway, or what we'll learn in the next 5 minutes, is as follows. We're going to learn how to identify the key elements within a pivot table, as well as how to create a pivot table. So before we get started, a little audience participation. You might be asking yourself, well, what is a pivot table? What's the benefit of a pivot table? Let me ask you, how many of you are familiar with the pivot table? Very good. Okay, so what would you say, how would you define a pivot table? Hans, yes, please.
I think it's an interactive table that summarizes large groups of data.
Excellent. Very good. Thank you for that definition. In fact, I'd like to add to that definition. I'd like to say that it's an advanced Excel tool that allows you, once again, to summarize and to analyze large groups of information or data within a database.
Well, then what's a database?
That's a good question. A database is a large group of organized data. So with these two definitions, what a pivot table is and what a database is, you might be asking yourself, well, what's the benefit? Why should I use a pivot table? Well, a pivot table is a time saver. It allows you to extract specific information from a larger group of information and to analyze that specific information. So let's say your manager asked you to find the highest revenue for your sales reps. Or maybe you might want to see the products that are generating the lowest sales for the last quarter. A pivot table will help you to do that. So, with that said, we're going to jump into our lesson. We're going to examine a pivot table as well as create our own pivot table. So let's jump into Excel. We're going to examine the key elements within a pivot table as well as create our own pivot table. We're in Excel now, and this is what a pivot table looks like. You will see our representatives here. They're represented in our row area. You'll see our products here, our categories in the column, and then we'll actually see the data, okay, the revenue. On the far right-hand side here, you'll see our field list, and you'll see a list here. And basically, these are the different elements that we can place into our pivot table, okay? And this is the area that represents each area. So basically, this pivot table allows us to see each sales rep, the revenue that they generated, as well as each product that they sold. Let's look at the source data. The source data is on a separate sheet. It's in the second quarter sales. This is the source data. Let's create our pivot table. In order to create our pivot table, what we're trying to determine here are our June sales for each sales rep. We're going to use the same source information. We'll place our mouse directly into the database. Anywhere, it doesn't make a difference. We're going to jump up to our ribbon, Insert, Pivot Table again. We have a dialog box. We have to answer two questions. The first question, select a table or a range. Now notice it's already filled in for us, and you'll see the dancing ants here. It's because we placed our mouse directly in the database, so it automatically assumed this is the information we want to use in our pivot table. It's correct. Secondly, where do we want to place the pivot table? By default, new worksheet is selected. We're going to go with that default. We're going to click OK, and we're halfway there. This is the makings of our pivot table. This is our layout. And what we need to do now is to bring our fields that we want into our pivot table. Now keep in mind what our objective is. We're trying to find the sales reps, the June sales for each sales rep. So we're going to drag the sales rep field into the row label. Notice how it plops into our row very easily there. We're going to take our category and drop it into our column label there, like so. And lastly, June sales. We can either click on it. Notice how it automatically plopped into our pivot table, and it also placed it there. So those are two ways in which you can place your fields within your pivot table. And this is our pivot table. So again, we're able to determine the June sales for all the sales reps and each product that they sold. So this is the conclusion of our 5-minute demonstration. how to create a pivot table. In summary, what we've learned here is how to identify the key elements within a pivot table, and secondly, how to create our pivot table. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Have a good day.